She'll never be a duchess." Augusta Helmsby said it with the small, finishing laugh that had served her at 3 counties' dinner tables and 1 bishop's drawing-room, and she set down her teacup as one sets down a verdict from which there is no appeal. Across the morning-room threshold, in the half-shadow of the door, propped open for the maid, bringing fresh coals, Clara Whitfield stood with the household ledger pressed against her front and did not move. Her left hand, half-gloved against the chill, held a pen. The pen had been about to enter a sum into the column for October's charity disbursements. It did not enter the sum. It hung above the page like a small, considered question. The verdict was not new. Clara had heard her aunt deliver it perhaps 11 times that month. At the dinner table with the brass dividers between them, in the corridor outside her own bedroom door, once at the lich gate after morning service. But this morning the laugh carried further because Mrs. Pettiford, the vicar's wife, answered it with one of her own. Twice spoken makes a thing true. Augusta knew that. So did Mrs. Pettiford. "My dear Lady Helmsby, Mrs. Pettiford had said, one must hope a girl of Clara's quiet temperament finds her settled lot in the village. Not every face is made for the carriage drive at Almack's." Just so. Augusta drew the laugh smaller, the size of a private agreement. One does what one can. Clara closed the ledger with the calm motion she had taught herself at Carmichael Cottage, when Lady Edith Ashcombe had been dying by inches, and the household had needed someone to keep the books steady. The motion did not draw the eye. She stepped back from the doorway and into the passage, and she did not let her shoes find their travel sound on the boards. The east passage at Helmsby Hall ran past 3 closed doors and 1 window that gave on to the stable yard. She passed the window. The yard below was empty, the gravel raked smooth where the gardener's boy had drawn his rake at dawn. Beyond the wall, the lane to the village dipped between 2 oak banks already brown with October. The post would be late today. The bay had thrown a shoe on the Bath road. She had heard the undergroom telling cook in the still room 2 hours ago. She went up the small stair to the 3rd floor, to the room that had been the late housekeeper's, and was now hers because Augusta had judged the south-facing rooms unsuitable for a niece in half-mourning. The judgment had stood for 2 years. Clara had ceased finding it unkind, the way one ceases finding the wind in the eaves unkind. The room held a narrow bed, a press for her gowns, a writing desk by the small dormer window, and a Sheraton box of polished mahogany standing on the desk's left edge. A gift from her late father, the only piece of furniture she had brought from Wells when she came to live here 3 years ago. The box had a brass key. Clara turned the key. She did not look at her own face as she did it, though the small spotted glass above the desk would have let her. Inside the box, her father's prayer book, her mother's 3 letters, a small ivory miniature of Lady Edith Ashcombe, painted the year before her last illness, and on the top a single sheet of cream paper folded in 3, the seal broken, dated 3 weeks earlier. The letter began in Sir Charles Helmsby's clipped baronet's hand, which Clara had been reading since the day he had set down her father's will at her elbow and said, "My dear girl, this house is yours as much as ours," in such terms as a man of the law and a man of conscience may use without weeping. The letter ran, "My dear Clara, I am charged with a communication that will, if you will permit me, deserve your private hearing before any other ear in this house comes by it. His Grace the Duke of Ashcombe, Theodore Carmichael, has done me the honour, by his own hand and his own seal, of formally requesting your hand in marriage. The request is made through me as your guardian, as your father wished, and is in every form and substance consistent with what a man of his name owes to a woman of yours. His Grace asks only that I keep the matter close, until he may come himself to bring you what was left to you, by the express wish of his great aunt, Lady Edith Ashcombe, such time as her nephew should find the courage he had always meant to find. I am, my dear, your guardian still, Charles Helmsby. Beneath Sir Charles's hand, folded inside the same paper, was a second sheet. This one in Lady Edith Ashcombe's older, harder scholar's hand, which Clara had read by Lady Edith's bedside on every grey afternoon of the last 6 weeks of her life. Clara, child, the second Carmichael ring is for you in such time as my nephew finds the courage I always knew he would find. He is slower than his father in this one thing only. Wait for him as I waited for the snow to come down off the moor, patiently, because it always comes. Edith. Clara read both letters once. She read neither of them a second time. She did not, with these letters, need to. She folded them back, turned the key in the brass lock, and slid the small key into the seam of her cuff, where her thumb could find it without thought. She set her ledger down on the desk. She drew the cap from her pen and entered the morning's sum into the column for October's charity disbursements. The figure was 8 shillings, 6pence. 2 guineas for the curate's coal purse. The pen moved easily once the figure was decided. Her hand had stopped trembling somewhere between the morning-room threshold and the 3rd floor. She looked at her hand on the page for a long moment. She did not let what she felt become a sentence in her head, because if she let it become a sentence, she would have to listen to it. The sentence that was very nearly there was this: that her aunt, 11 floors and 1 ledger and 3 Sheraton drawers below, did not know what was lodged in the small mahogany box at the top of the 3rd floor stair, and that Augusta's laugh, when at last it learned what she did not know, would be the smallest laugh of the year. Clara closed her eyes. She let the sentence not happen. She entered the next charity sum. Below stairs, in the still room, Cook was scolding the undergroom for tracking gravel in. Outside, beyond the kitchen garden wall, a robin in the holly was singing the brief, bright song that meant the morning was holding clear. Clara listened to the robin for the 4 bars it gave her and went on with her work. 2 days' ride west, at the south face of Ashcombe Park, where the grass ran down to the home wood and the great oak Theodore Carmichael's father had planted at his birth, still stood untrimmed. At the foot of the slope, the 9th Duke of Ashcombe was standing at his study window with a leather case in one hand and a folded letter in the other, and was thinking about the Bridgewater Road. The Bridgewater Road, taken at a steady walk-trot from Ashcombe to the village of Helmsby in Wiltshire, was a thing of perhaps a day and a half by the post, or 2 days on horseback if one allowed the horses their rest. He had taken it twice already this autumn. Once for the funeral of his great-aunt, Lady Edith Ashcombe, at the small parish church above Carmichael Cottage in September, and once a fortnight after that, very quietly, to ask Sir Charles Helmsby for his ward's hand, and to sit afterward in Sir Charles's library with a glass of the man's best, Madeira, until they had said all that 2 men of conscience needed to say. He had ridden home from that second journey with the matter settled, his great-aunt's leather ring-case in his coat pocket, and a promise that the engagement should be kept private for as long as Theodore wished. Until his own sister, Lady Anne Ashcombe, returned from her godmother's at Whitby, until the Carmichael Cottage repairs were complete, until he could come himself to give the second Carmichael ring into Clara Whitfield's hand the way his great-aunt had wanted it given. His sister was due at Ashcombe in 3 days. The Carmichael Cottage roof had been mended on Monday last. The leather case was on his desk. He had been at the study window a quarter of an hour. The light off the east face of the house had moved over his hand twice in that time, and twice he had not looked at it. The portrait above the fireplace was of his father, the 8th Duke of Ashcombe, who had not been a fortunate man in his last decade. Theodore's father had loved horses and bad advice in roughly equal measure, and the estate had carried the cost of both for 19 years before the cost had finally come due. Theodore had inherited the title 2 years ago at 26, and what he had inherited with it had not been the estate his grandfather had left, but a substantial first mortgage upon it, a second mortgage upon the home farm, 3 counties' worth of unpaid mason's bills, and a long, quiet letter from his late mother's solicitor outlining how things stood. He had read the letter once. He had not, with that letter, needed to read it twice either. There was a particular grim economy in the Carmichael habit of mind. You read difficult truths the once, and you set them down, and you began the work. The work had taken 2 years. The first mortgage was retired. The second was reduced by half. The mason's bills had been paid in installments through the spring. The home farm had a new tenant on a long lease, and a steward who understood, as the last steward had not, that the home wood was to be coppiced and not felled. He could walk through any room at Ashcombe, now without flinching at what had been soldered from it. The portrait of his father stayed because Theodore had decided, on the morning after the title came to him, that the portrait was the one item of furniture in the house that he would not punish for what his father had done. He had not in all the work found time for the courage his great-aunt Edith had said he would find. He had thought, while his father was alive, that he would find it in the year after the title fell to him. He had thought, after the title fell, that he would find it when the second mortgage was retired. He had thought, when the second mortgage was retired, that he would find it when his sister Anne came home for Michaelmas. Each time the thing he had decided on, as the threshold had come and gone, he had decided on the next. His great-aunt had observed this from her chair at Carmichael Cottage, and she had not said any of the obvious things. She had said, instead, one September afternoon, the last lucid afternoon of her life, "Theodore, I have left the second Carmichael ring to Miss Whitfield. I have written it into the codicil. If you require a reason to go down to Helmsby Hall in November, you may now find one at the bottom of my writing box." He had said, "What is the reason, Aunt Edith?" She had said, "The reason is the ring. If you require a further reason, you are not the boy I have been correcting at Latin since you were 7. He had not that afternoon found a reply. He had taken her hand. She had patted his with the small, precise pat of a woman who has decided everything she is going to decide. She had died 3 weeks later. He had ridden down to Helmsby Hall a fortnight after the funeral, sat in Sir Charles's library, and asked, in such terms as a man of his name owes to a woman of hers, that Sir Charles permit him to write to Miss Whitfield directly through her guardian. He had written. Sir Charles had answered. Theodore had ridden home with the matter settled. He had not written to Clara herself. He had judged it not his place to write to her before he could come himself, and put the ring into her hand. His great-aunt's wish had been very particular about the hand and the giving. He had honoured the wish. He had also, perhaps, in honouring it, indulged the older Carmichael habit of postponing the moment of plain courage to a slightly later afternoon. His sister was due at Ashcombe in 3 days. The Carmichael cottage roof was mended. The leather case was in his coat pocket. He had ordered his horse for first light. He turned the case over once in his hand. It was good leather. It had carried the ring across 2 Carmichael generations. He set it back into the inner pocket of his riding coat, drew the coat from the chair where it hung, and went out to the stable-yard to look at the horse that was to take him to Helmsby Hall. The horse, a bay 6-year-old his late father had bred, and which Theodore had refused, on principle, to sell, stood quiet in the cobbled yard while the head groom checked the off-fore. The morning held clear. The sky over the home wood was pale, the kind of pale that holds for a day's ride. The head groom said, "He'll go, Your Grace." Theodore touched the bay's neck with the gloved knuckle of his left hand. The small Carmichael gesture his great-aunt had taught him in his childhood, when the bay's mother had been put to him as the first horse he was to learn upon. He said, "Then we shall go." He went into his study a last time. The portrait above the fireplace had not moved. He addressed the portrait under his breath. Because he had taken to addressing the portrait under his breath these 2 years past, and he had not yet entirely outgrown the habit, he said, "I have left the work in good order. I shall be back within the fortnight. I am going for a girl, sir, and you may think of it as you please." The portrait did not answer. He had not expected it to. He took the Bridgewater Road at the steady walk-trot of a man who has decided everything he is going to decide. The morning of the 3rd day after Augusta Helmsby's verdict in the morning room, Clara Whitfield came down the small stair of the East Passage, carrying the household ledger and a square of folded blue cambric. A sample of Mariana Helmsby's new gown, which Clara had been asked to match against a length in the linen press, and was met on the half-landing by the under-butler with a card on a tray. "For the master, miss," the under-butler said. "As he is from home." Clara took the card. It bore the engraved seal of the See of Salisbury and the hand of the bishop's secretary, regretting that the bishop should not, after all, be able to dine at Helmsby Hall on Thursday next. She set the card back upon the tray. "You'll wish to bring this to her ladyship, Robert," Clara said. Robert. The under-butler hesitated. He was a man of 52 who had been at Helmsby Hall longer than Lady Helmsby herself. His hesitation had to do with what her ladyship had been arranging since dawn. "Her ladyship has gone to the village, miss," Robert said. "She is at the vicarage with Mrs. Pettiford. Mr. Foley has been seen at the curate's lodging since yesterday. Her ladyship desired me to inform Miss Helmsby that the dinner is to go forward in any case, and that Mr. Foley is to be invited in place of his lordship, with the curate and his wife." He said his lordship with the slight upward inflection that meant his lordship the bishop, and Mr. Foley with the slight downward inflection that meant Mr. Edmund Foley, half-pay militia officer, recently returned from his regiment to lodge with the curate at Helmsby village. He had been at the lodging since yesterday. Augusta had not, until this morning, known he had come. Clara held the card a moment longer, the ledger under her arm, pressed against her side. With a small steady pressure she found, in this moment, useful. "And Sir Charles," she said. "Sir Charles is at quarter sessions at Devizes until tomorrow noon, miss." "Just so." Clara handed the card back. "Take it to her ladyship at the vicarage. She will wish to know." Robert bowed. He went. Clara did not move from the half-landing for the small interval of time required to count her own breath to 8. Then she went down to the morning room and laid out the cambric and the ledger and the linen press's key on the writing desk. And she stood at the window that gave on to the carriage drive. The drive ran straight from the south porch to the Bath Road, flanked by lime trees that had been planted before her uncle Sir Charles had been born. The trees were already half-bared. Beyond them, the Bath Road went southwest to Devizes, where Sir Charles was, and east to Salisbury, where the bishop was, and further west, by Bridgewater, to Ashcombe, where she did not let herself look. The dinner was to be on Thursday. This was Tuesday. Sir Charles would be home tomorrow noon. Augusta had decided on Mr. Foley. Augusta had decided, evidently, that the dinner she had originally intended as a half-formal introduction of her own daughter Mariana to the curate's bishopric circle was now to be turned to a different purpose. Mr. Foley had been brought down from his lodging at Salisbury to Helmsby. Augusta had been at the vicarage since dawn. Mrs. Pettiford was a woman who carried what she heard at the vicarage to whomever might wish to hear it. By Thursday at dinner, the dining-room of Helmsby Hall would hold the vicar, his wife, Mr. Edmund Foley, Augusta, Mariana, Sir Charles, if he had returned in time, and Clara herself. Clara understood now what dinner this was to be. She looked at her own hand on the curtain rail. Her hand was not trembling. Her hand had not trembled, she thought, since the morning room verdict 3 days ago. The verdict had done some part of its work. The rest had been done by the letter in the mahogany box. But the letter said, "Until His Grace may come himself." The letter said, "Keep the matter close." The letter said her uncle Sir Charles was bound by his word to His Grace to keep the matter from his own wife until His Grace came. Augusta did not know. Augusta would not know until His Grace came. His Grace was perhaps 2 days west on the Bridgewater Road, or perhaps not yet on the road, or perhaps in his study at Ashcombe with the leather case still on his desk. Clara had no way of knowing which. She had Sir Charles's hand in writing. She had His Grace's name in Sir Charles's hand. She had her own promise to her uncle that she would speak of it to no one until His Grace himself came. She had, between now and Thursday dinner, no way of preventing Augusta from arranging at table the announcement her aunt had decided to make. Clara stood at the window a moment longer. The robin in the holly was not singing this morning. The morning held grey instead. The lime trees stirred and steadied. "Miss?" said a voice behind her. Mariana Helmsby had come into the morning room without Clara hearing her. Mariana moved through her own house with the silent walk she had affected at 19, for the purpose of not being asked, by either of her parents, what she was thinking. She was in a primrose yellow morning dress that did not suit her colouring, and that Clara had told her, gently, the day before, did not suit her colouring. She was wearing it this morning, to spite her mother, who was not in the room to be spited. "Mariana, Mamma has gone to the village. I know. She has invited Mr. Foley to dinner on Thursday." "I know that also." Mariana came across to the window. She stood at Clara's elbow. She was a fraction taller than Clara, and a year older than her mother believed her to be, which was 18 instead of 19. A small private mercy Augusta had decided upon when Mariana had first been thrown into the local circle, and had not, the first year, taken. Mariana looked out at the lime trees. "Mamma means to have an announcement made at dinner," Mariana said. "I overheard her tell Mrs. Pettiford yesterday in the still room. She means Mr. Foley to make it. I know that too. Cousin Clara." Mariana's voice did not change pitch. "I shall not let her." Clara turned her head. Mariana Helmsby was looking, not at Clara, but at the lime trees. Her chin was very steady. She had not, in 3 years under the same roof, said any sentence so direct. "I have known Mr. Foley a little longer than Mamma supposes," Mariana said. "I have known him, I think, well enough to be done with knowing him. I shall not let him stand at dinner on Thursday and make his speech as if he had a right to make it. Cousin, you shall not have to say anything to Mamma." Mariana folded her hands at her face, the way her mother had taught her to fold them. "I shall manage, Mamma. I shall not promise you how. I shall only promise you that Mr. Foley shall not, at Thursday's dinner, speak the sentence Mamma has put in his mouth." "You have, cousin, my word." Clara was silent. The robin had begun again, somewhere out beyond the holly. The lime trees stirred. Mariana was still looking at the trees. "Mariana," Clara said, "you are kinder than I have been able to believe." "I am not kind, cousin." Mariana's mouth moved very slightly. "I am angry. They are not quite the same thing. They are useful in some of the same rooms." She turned then, and her primrose skirt brushed Clara's grey one, and she went out of the morning room by the door that led to the gallery, and she did not look back. Clara stood at the window for a long moment after she had gone. The ledger had slid an inch on the writing desk where she had set it down. She did not pick it up. She did not, in this moment, need to do anything with her hands at all. Outside, on the carriage drive, a single rider on a bay horse was coming up from the Bath Road at a steady walk-trot, in the unhurried manner of a man who has decided everything he is going to decide. He was still half a mile away. He was wearing a dark riding coat. He carried a single small leather case at his side, against the line of his hip. Clara did not, at this distance, recognize the horse. She did not need to. She knew the seat of the rider on it. She had ridden out twice, with that seat from the gate of Chronicle Cottage, when its mistress had been dying, and its nephew had come down for the afternoons. His Grace the Duke of Ashcombe was a day and a half early. Clara closed her eyes. She let, this time, the sentence happen. The sentence was, "He has come on Tuesday, and Augusta does not know what is in the morning-room desk, and Sir Charles is at Devizes, and Mariana is angry, and Mrs. Pettiford carries gossip the length of 3 parishes, and the cambric on the desk does not, after all, match the swatch in the linen press." She opened her eyes. The bay had come up to the lime trees. The rider drew rein. He swung down from the horse with the small, unhurried motion of a man who has ridden 2 days and has not yet decided he is tired. The head groom of Helmsby Hall came out to take the horse. The rider gave the bay a touch on the neck with the gloved knuckle of his left hand. The small Carmichael gesture Clara had seen Lady Edith Ashcombe receive in her chair at Carmichael Cottage on the last lucid afternoon of her life. "My name is Carmichael," the rider said to the head groom. "I am, for the moment, a friend of the household. I should be obliged if you would carry my card to whomever, in Sir Charles Helmsby's absence, is presently keeping the keys of the house." The head groom, who knew very well what name and what title belonged to the small folded card the rider had drawn from his coat pocket, bowed without hurry. "Mr. Carmichael," he said, "I shall carry it directly. Will you step in?" "I shall walk a little in the lime walk first," the Duke said. "I would not, on such a morning, be sorry to stretch my back." He smiled, very small, at the head groom. He turned. He walked at the slow, steady pace of a man who has decided to give the household a small interval to organize itself down the avenue of half-bared lime trees towards the south porch. Clara watched him from the morning-room window. She did not call out. She did not knock on the glass. She did not, by any motion of her hand, indicate herself. She had, the letter said, made her Uncle Sir Charles a promise. She had made the promise 3 weeks ago. She had kept it 3 weeks. She would, she found, keep it the further hour. The Duke walked the length of the lime walk. He stopped at the halfway bench. He looked up at the south face of the house. His gaze traveled along the 1st floor, the 2nd floor, the 3rd floor. It came to rest on the small dormer window of the 3rd floor that gave on to the room that had been the late housekeeper's. He did not, of course, know that it had been the late housekeeper's. He looked at the window because the window was lit by the morning light, and because, perhaps, he had counted 3 floors up. Clara, in the morning room 1 floor below the dormer, was not at the dormer window. He could not, therefore, have seen her face there. He looked at the window a moment longer. Then he looked down at the porch. The under-butler, Robert, had come out by then with a footman. The Duke went towards them. They bowed. Robert took, with a small careful motion he had perfected in 40 years of service, the folded card the Duke gave him. Robert read the card. He did not, in his own face, show that he had read it. He bowed once again. He said, "Will your Grace be pleased to wait in the small saloon? I shall send to her ladyship at the vicarage directly." "You shall send to her ladyship," the Duke said, very gently, "after I have, with your leave, had the privilege of paying my respects to Miss Whitfield, if Miss Whitfield will permit it. Sir Charles knows my errand. I should, by Sir Charles' permission, speak with her first." Robert, who had been at Helmsby Hall longer than Lady Helmsby herself, who had known Sir Charles since Sir Charles had been a young man of trade, who had carried Clara Whitfield's father's small black coffin out of the porch 4 years ago. Robert bowed once again. "Your Grace," he said, "Miss Whitfield is in the morning room. I shall show your Grace directly." He turned. The Duke followed. They went up the porch steps and through the hall and along the gallery towards the morning room, and the morning room's door was already half ajar, because Clara had not, after Mariana had left her, gone to close it. Robert stopped at the door. He drew breath. He said, very quietly, the small sentence he had not, in 40 years of service at Helmsby Hall, ever had occasion to say, "Miss, His Grace the Duke of Ashcombe begs leave to wait upon you." Clara turned from the window. The morning room was full of grey October light. Her hand was steady on the curtain rail. She had time, in the half-second before the door opened wider, to think one small, clear thing. The thing was, my aunt is at the vicarage, my uncle is at Devizes, my cousin has promised me one thing she cannot quite deliver, and the second Carmichael ring is, by his great-aunt's wish, in his coat pocket. The verdict of 3 days ago is, between this room and the carriage drive, no longer the only verdict in the house, she said. "Robert, show him in." Robert showed him in. The Duke crossed the threshold. He was a man of 28, lean as the bay he had ridden 2 days, dark-haired, dark-eyed, with the clean-shaven jaw and the cut of cheekbone the Carmichael portraits at Ashcombe had carried for 3 generations. He was wearing the dark plum riding coat his sister had insisted he take to the country, a cream waistcoat, a fresh cravat tied for the call. He stopped 4 paces inside the room. He bowed, not the formal bow of a man at a court drawing-room, but the half-bow of a man who has come a long way, and would rather, if she would permit it, look at her face than at the rug. He said, in the clipped Carmichael voice his great-aunt had spent his childhood correcting at Latin. "Miss Whitfield, I should not have come this morning if I had been able to wait another day. I find I have not, in fact, been able. I should be obliged if you would forgive me the early hour." Clara, in her grey morning gown, with the small mahogany key still in the seam of her cuff, and her aunt at the vicarage, 3/4 of a mile away, made, across the morning-room rug, the small, quiet curtsy her father had taught her at the age of 7, in such terms as a curate's daughter owes to a man of his name. She said very steadily, "Your Grace, the hour is not in this house an early one. I am very particularly glad you have come today." The Duke crossed the rug to the writing desk. He did not, in the small interval of his walking, take his eyes from her face. Not in the way of a man wishing to disconcert her, but in the way of a man who has been counting weeks. He stopped at a polite 4 feet. He drew the leather case from his coat pocket and set it down upon the desk's left edge, beside the small square of cambric. "Miss Whitfield," he said, "I have come down to put this into your hand by my great-aunt's wish, and to ask you a question for myself." The leather case sat on the desk. It was perhaps 3 inches square, dull green calf, worn at the corners where Lady Edith Ashcombe's thumb had passed over them for 40 years. "I have written to your guardian," the Duke said. "Sir Charles has done me the kindness of replying that you are at liberty to receive my address. I should not, however, present the case until I had heard from you. I shall stand here, and the case shall sit there, until you have, very plainly, told me what you wish me to do with it." He stepped back a half-pace from the desk. He set his hand behind his back. He was, Clara observed, perfectly composed in the matter of his shoulders, and not at all composed in the matter of his right thumb, which had gone to the rim of his signet ring, and was passing over the rim, and had not stopped. She said, "Your Grace, I have your guardian's. I have my guardian's letter. I read it 3 weeks ago. I have read it once a day since. I understood from Sir Charles that you had it. I have answered it, in private, every day since. I have not in private said no." He drew breath. He did not let his face change. The thumb on the signet ring stilled. "Miss Whitfield." "Your Grace," Clara said, "you have not asked me your question." "I have not asked it," he said, "because I am, this morning, slower than I am in any other room of any other house. and I should not like to make so important a request in a sentence I had not yet found. He set his shoulders a fraction further back. He looked at the case on the desk. He looked at her. He said, "Miss Whitfield, will you, in such time as you find tolerable, do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Clara was silent. She let, for the second time that morning, a sentence happen in her head. The sentence was, "I am 28 paces from the dormer window of the third-floor room where, 3 weeks ago, I read the letter that brought me here. I have lived 3 years under this roof. I have been a curate's daughter and a poor relation. I have been told, 11 times this month, that I shall never be a duchess. And the man who is asking me has ridden 2 days to ask, and is, in this room, more uncertain than I have ever seen a man of his name." She let the sentence finish. She said, "Your Grace, I will." He did not at once move. He did not at once speak. He set his hand very carefully on the rim of the writing desk, as a man setting his hand on a ship's rail in a moment of unexpected steadiness. He said after a small interval, I had not been certain. Your aunt has been very gracious in writing to me of Mr. Foley. My aunt does not know what is in my desk." Just so. He looked for the first time since he had crossed the room, almost amused. The amusement was very small. It was, Clara observed, the amusement of a man who has been holding his breath since the Bridgewater Road. "Your aunt and I have not, on the matter of Mr. Foley, been corresponding. My aunt would be greatly surprised by that." "I shall," the Duke said, "do what little I am able this morning to give your aunt that surprise gently." He reached, then, for the leather case. He opened it. Inside, on a small bed of black silk worn smooth, lay the second Carmichael ring, a thin band of old gold with a single sapphire set deep, no larger than a pea, in the manner of the Carmichael work of the 1790s. The stone caught the grey morning light off the curtain rail and held it. "It was my great-aunt's by gift from her own mother," the Duke said. "She left it to you. She was very particular about whose hand it was to be put into. She gave me instructions, you may find this useful to know, on the precise manner in which the giving was to be done." His mouth moved a very small fraction. She did not, in the end, write the instructions down. "I shall, if you will be patient with me, make my best attempt." Clara, with the calm motion she had taught herself at Carmichael Cottage, drew the half-glove from her left hand. She set the glove on the desk beside the cambric. She held her hand out, palm up, very steady. The Duke took her hand. He drew the ring from its silk. He slid it, with the small, careful motion of a man who has practiced the motion 4 times in a stable-yard mirror at Ashcombe, onto the third finger of her left hand. The ring fit, perhaps because Lady Edith had asked Clara, one afternoon in the Dower House garden, what her ring size was. Perhaps because Lady Edith had had her own ring sized to it that very afternoon. Perhaps because Lady Edith Ashcombe had, in her last lucid months, arranged a number of small things in a number of small drawers. He set his hand briefly over hers. He did not speak. Neither, in the small interval, did Clara. The robin in the holly out beyond the kitchen garden wall began again, the brief, bright song of a morning holding clear. He stepped back. He bowed once. He said, "I shall, with your leave, wait in the small saloon until your aunt returns from the vicarage. I shall not, until she is in the house, write to anyone of what has been done in this room. Sir Charles is at Devizes until tomorrow noon. I have already, in the matter of Sir Charles, a separate sentence prepared. You may, between now and your aunt's return, do whatever you would wish to do. I shall be guided by you." Clara looked at her own hand. The ring on her finger was, even at half a glance, unmistakable as a Carmichael piece, the sapphire so small and old it could only have come from a London goldsmith of the previous century, the band so thin it could only have been worked for a particular hand. She drew the half-glove back over her fingers. The ring sat under the kid. It made the smallest possible bulge. She said, Your Grace, I should be obliged if you would, for the present quarter of an hour, walk in the lime walk again. My aunt will be returning by the south porch. I shall meet her at the porch myself. I shall not, with your leave, have her come into the morning room and find you here before she has, very plainly, learnt from me what she has not, until this morning, known." The Duke considered her a moment. He said very quietly, "Miss Whitfield, are you quite certain you wish to meet her without me at your elbow?" "I am certain. I have lived 3 years under this roof. I have not in those 3 years asked her to know anything she did not wish to know. I shall ask her this once." "As you wish." He bowed again. He turned. He went out by the morning-room door, along the gallery, through the porch, down the steps. He took the lime walk at the unhurried pace of a man who has decided he shall be of use by being out of the way. Clara stood at the writing desk a moment longer. She set the small leather case in the desk's left drawer and turned the key. She put the cambric back into the linen press's wrapping. She drew the glove a fraction higher on her wrist so that the cuff covered the ring. She went down the gallery, through the porch, and stood on the south steps with her hands folded at her waist in the way Mariana's mother had taught Mariana to fold them. The carriage came up the drive 10 minutes later. Augusta Helmsby descended at the steps with the small, bustling rapidity of a woman who had been told by the vicarage messenger that there had been a gentleman caller at the hall whose card the under-butler had judged worth interrupting morning calls for. The vicar's wife had brought Augusta home. Mrs. Pettiford was still in the carriage, peering out from under her bonnet at the south face of the house. Augusta did not at first see Clara on the steps. She was looking at the porch hall for Robert. Aunt Augusta turned. She had, in her left hand, her glove not yet drawn back on, and in her right hand a folded piece of cream paper, which Clara recognized as the bishop's card. The bishop had been the reason for the journey to the vicarage. Mr. Foley had been the second reason. Augusta's face was bright with the particular color she carried when she had been arranging a matter she believed was about to satisfy her. Clara Augusta's voice was crisp. "Robert tells me there has been a gentleman." "Yes, Aunt." "Whose card has been kept from me until I should return." "Yes, Aunt. You shall, before I take off my bonnet, tell me whose card it is and what his business has been." Mrs. Pettiford, in the carriage, leant a fraction further out. Clara observed her leaning. "Aunt," Clara said, "I shall be very glad to tell you in the small saloon, with the door closed and Mrs. Pettiford released with my respects to her own house." Augusta drew breath. The vicar's wife drew breath at the same time in the carriage with a small visible regret. "Mrs. Pettiford," Augusta said over her shoulder, in the tone of a woman who has decided she shall, if she must, cut her own dinner-party guest. "I shall send to you this afternoon. Forgive me. The carriage will return you to the village by the lower road." Mrs. Pettiford bowed in the carriage. The coachman touched his hat. The carriage went down the drive. Augusta turned to Clara. She drew off her bonnet. She handed the bonnet to a footman. She said very crisply, "The small saloon," directly. They went, the two of them, along the gallery to the small saloon. Augusta closed the door herself. She set her bonnet on a side chair. She turned. She faced her niece across the rug. "Clara, whose card?" "Aunt." The card was His Grace the Duke of Ashcombe's. Augusta did not at first hear it. The phrase did not fit any sentence she had been preparing. She heard it as one hears the wrong language in a familiar room. Her face went very slightly blank. "I beg your pardon." "His Grace the Duke of Ashcombe, Aunt. He has ridden 2 days from Wiltshire. He is, at the present quarter of an hour, in the lime walk. He is to come back into the house when I send Robert out for him." "Clara." "He has come, Aunt, to ask me a question. He asked it half an hour ago in the morning room. I have given him my answer. The answer was yes." Augusta sat down. She did not, in fact, mean to sit down. She found the chair behind her, and she sat. her right hand still holding the bishop's card, came up and laid the card on her own knee with the small absent motion of a woman setting a card down to be picked up again later. Clara, Aunt, I have been very wrong this last week to keep the matter from you. I had given my uncle, Sir Charles, my promise that I should not speak of it until his Grace himself came to put the ring into my hand. The ring is now upon my hand. The promise is, I judge, discharged. I beg your pardon for the 3 weeks I have kept it." Augusta was silent. She was looking at the rug between her shoes. She was looking at the small worn place in the rug where her own bonnet ribbon, dropped one morning the spring before, had marked the wool. She did not for a long moment raise her face. "Mr. Foley," she said, in a voice that was, for the first time in 3 years under that roof, neither crisp nor finishing, "is at the vicarage. He has been brought down at my invitation. I have invited him to dine here Thursday, Mr. Foley shall be at dinner, Aunt, if you wish him to be. He shall not be making the announcement you had intended for him to make." Augusta drew breath. She put the bishop's card down on the small table at her elbow. She said, very quietly, the small finishing sentence she had used 3 days before in the morning room. "She'll never be a duchess." Clara said, "Aunt, His Grace is in the lime walk." There was a long silence. Outside the small saloon, in the hall, a clock that had been at Helmsby Hall longer than any of them struck 11. The strokes were measured, unhurried, finishing. Augusta lifted her face. Her color had changed. The bright, pretty color of a woman who has been arranging matters had drained out of her cheek. What was left under it was older, neither vicious nor kind, only older. "Clara," Augusta said, "I shall require a moment. Aunt, take the morning if you would. I shall send Robert out for his Grace. I shall bring him into the small saloon when you have, in your own time, called for him to be brought in. He has, on this matter of Mr. Foley, a sentence prepared. He should rather, I think, deliver it to you here than at dinner Thursday with the vicar in the room." Augusta's hand on the bishop's card was still. After a long pause, she said very quietly, "Send out for him." Clara curtsied. She left the small saloon. She went along the gallery and out the porch, and down the steps and along the lime walk to where the Duke of Ashcombe was standing with his gloved hand on the halfway bench, looking up at the south face of Helmsby Hall. He turned at her step. He did not, at the question in his eyes, ask anything aloud. "She will receive you," Clara said. "She is in the small saloon. I shall be with you." "You shall be," he said, "with me always." Clara, for the first time that morning, smiled. The smile was very small. They walked the lime walk back together. Robert was waiting on the porch. He bowed. He opened the door. The Duke gave his hat and gloves to the footman. He followed Clara along the gallery to the small saloon, and Clara opened the door of the small saloon, and went in first and stood at her aunt's elbow and said, in the perfectly clear voice of a curate's daughter who has lived 3 years in a house in which she has not been thought to have one, "Aunt, His Grace the Duke of Ashcombe, Your Grace my Aunt Lady Helmsby." The Duke bowed. Augusta rose. She had time, in the small interval of his bow, to find the face she had used at 3 counties' dinner tables and 1 bishop's drawing-room. She found it. She did not, this once, find the laugh that ordinarily went with it. The face stood without the laugh. "Your Grace," Augusta said, "you are very welcome at Helmsby Hall. Lady Helmsby," the Duke bowed once again, "I am obliged to you. I have already taken the great liberty of speaking to your niece, and to her uncle, through correspondence. I shall, with your indulgence, speak to you a few minutes now of the matter of Mr. Edmund Foley." Augusta drew breath. Augusta did not, this once, speak. "I have been informed," the Duke said very quietly, "that Mr. Foley has been brought down to the vicarage at your invitation. I have been informed by my own household separately that Mr. Foley has lodgings at Salisbury, which he has very lately quitted. I have been informed by my late great-aunt's solicitor separately again, that Mr. Foley has, this past summer, attempted to interest him in a question of family connections that did not, on examination, hold. I should not, Lady Helmsby, wish to embarrass you. I should wish only to ask, with your leave, that the dinner you have been planning for Thursday shall now go forward, and that Mr. Foley shall be at it, and that I shall be at it, and that the small announcement which you and I have separately been imagining for that evening shall be not the announcement Mr. Foley has been led to expect, but the announcement which Sir Charles and I have arranged. I should be obliged if you would permit me at that dinner to take Miss Whitfield in to table myself. Augusta sat down again. She had risen at his entrance. She sat down now without intention. Your Grace, she said, I shall be honoured. I am obliged to you, ma'am. The Duke bowed once more. I shall present myself at dinner. I shall, between now and dinner, have the very particular pleasure of being shown the Helmsby Hall gardens by Miss Whitfield in such fragments of the day as her household business will allow her. I shall take rooms at the village inn. I shall not, with your indulgence, impose upon the hall. Your Grace, there are 5 rooms unoccupied in the east wing. I am obliged to you, ma'am. The inn will suit me. Augusta did not press further. The Duke bowed. He gave Clara his arm. They went out of the small saloon, along the gallery, into the porch, down the steps, and along the lime walk to where the bay was being walked in slow, careful figures by the head groom. Behind them in the small saloon, Augusta Helmsby sat for a long quarter of an hour, with the bishop's card on the table at her elbow. She did not, in that quarter hour, ring for tea. She did not, at the end of the quarter hour, take up her bonnet. She sat with her hands folded in her lap, as her mother had taught her at the age of 9 to fold them, and she looked at the small worn place in the rug where her bonnet ribbon had marked the wool the spring before. Mariana Helmsby found her there, an hour later, when Mariana came back from the lower drawing-room. Mariana stopped in the doorway. She looked at her mother. She did not say anything. Augusta did not look up, Mama, Mariana, Mama, Cousin Clara, I know, child, Mama. I had intended to tell you, at dinner this evening, what I knew of Mr. Foley. Mariana, what did you know of Mr. Foley? That he is, Mama, that he is not, what we have at this house been thinking him. Augusta sat very still. She said, after a moment, in a voice Mariana had heard, perhaps 4 times in her life, Child, sit down. Mariana came across the rug and sat on the stool at her mother's knee. She did not, for the first time in 2 years, scrape the stool on the floor as she sat. The stool moved silently. Mariana folded her own hands in her lap, in the way her mother had taught her at the age of 9. She waited. Augusta did not look at her. Augusta said, at last, Your cousin Clara is to be married to the Duke of Ashcombe. Yes, Mamma. He has just been in this room. I know, Mamma. You knew of the engagement. I knew, Mamma, of the letter your husband received 3 weeks ago. I knew because Cousin Clara did not, 3 weeks ago, draw the door of her own room quite closed when she sat down at her desk to read it. I did not, until this morning, know what was to be done about it. Cousin Clara had given her word. Augusta said, Just so. There was a small silence. Mamma, I am sorry. What are you sorry for, child? I am sorry, Mamma, for what you said in the morning room 3 days ago. Augusta's hand on her own knee made the small, slight motion of a woman setting a card down to be picked up again later. She did not, in the small interval, find the laugh. Mariana, go and see whether cook has the venison out for Thursday. I shall come down in a quarter of an hour. Mariana rose. She kissed her mother on the temple. She had not, in 3 years under that roof, done so without being directed. She went out. Augusta sat. The clock in the hall struck the quarter. She sat through the quarter. The clock struck the half. She rose. She picked up her bonnet from the side chair. She did not put it on. She carried it under her arm and went out of the small saloon and along the gallery, and she went up the small stair of the east passage to the 3rd floor. And she stood for a long moment outside the door of the room that had been the late housekeeper's, and that was Clara's. And she did not knock. And she did not go in. She turned. She went back down the small stair. She went into her own bedchamber. She closed the door. The door's latch fell quietly. The house went on without her for half an hour more. The Duke of Ashcombe took rooms at the Helmsby Arms, the village inn whose sign had been painted by a Salisbury man 4 reigns before, and whose landlord, Mr. Cox, had the better part of 3 days' warning that a gentleman of Ashcombe's name would be wanting his best parlour. The best parlour at the Helmsby Arms was a low ceilinged panelled room with a window over the village green, a small writing table, and a fire that had been laid since dawn against the chance of the gentleman being early. The Duke saw the fire and the table and the panelled room and was content with all 3. He took his dinner alone that first night. He wrote to his sister, Lady Anne Ashcombe at Whitby, that the matter at Helmsby Hall had been settled in the morning and that she might come down to Wiltshire by the road through Helmsby village. He wrote to his steward at Ashcombe that the Carmichael cottage garden was to have its hedges cut back as had been ordered. He wrote to Sir Charles Helmsby at Devizes a single line. I have called this morning at the Hall. The matter is in such order as your kindness has permitted. I beg you will sleep tonight at the sessions, and not ride home in the dark. He sealed the 3 letters with the Ashcombe seal. He gave them to Mr. Cox to be carried by the morning post. He went to bed early. He slept. He had not slept early since the title fell to him 2 years ago. And he woke at 6, with the small surprise of a man who has been holding a question for a long time, and has at last put the question down. Sir Charles Helmsby came up the drive of Helmsby Hall at noon the following day, having ridden the Devizes road in the small, steady walk of a man who had read his daughter-in-law's letter at the inn at Lavington, and had decided not to flog his horse for the news at the end of it. He came into the small saloon. He found his wife sitting by the fire, his daughter at her elbow, and a cup of cooled tea between them. He went to his wife. He put his hand on her shoulder. Augusta, he said. Charles, I should have, my dear, told you of the letter. You should not have told me of the letter. I should have. Charles, your word to his grace was, in this house, to be kept. You kept it. The fault is none of yours. Sir Charles sat down on the chair opposite. He did not for a long moment speak. He had been a baronet 11 years, had been a husband 29, had been a guardian to a curate's daughter 4. He had been, at different times in his life, several other kinds of useful man. He had not in any of those terms found himself certain what to say to his wife. In the small saloon at noon on a Wednesday in October, he said at last, I shall speak with his grace at the inn at 3. Yes, my dear, and we are to have him to dinner Thursday. Yes. And Mr. Foley. Augusta did not answer. She looked into the fire. Her hand on the arm of the chair made the small, slight motion of a woman setting a card down to be picked up again later. Sir Charles, who had known his wife 30 years, observed the motion. Augusta, I shall write to the vicarage today that Mr. Foley's invitation is withdrawn. You shall not, Charles, my dear. You shall not, Mr. Foley is to be at our dinner Thursday. Augusta. She turned her face to him. She was very pale. Charles, if you withdraw Mr. Foley's invitation, the village will know by Friday that he was withdrawn because of what I had supposed of him, and what was not in fact in him. The village will know that I have been foolish about Mr. Foley. The village will know it through Mrs. Pettiford. I shall not, Charles, give the village that pleasure. Mr. Foley shall come to our dinner Thursday. He shall sit at the foot of the table. He shall see what announcement has been made. He shall, on Friday, go back to Salisbury at his own expense. I shall, on Friday, write to my cousin Lady Constance Greville in London. The matter shall be done. You shall, in the matter, do nothing. Sir Charles looked at her a long moment. He said, "As you wish, my dear." He rose. He kissed his wife on the temple. He went out of the small saloon. Mariana, at her mother's elbow, did not this time speak. She had been at her mother's elbow since the night before. She had not yet been sent to bed. Augusta, when her husband had gone, set her hand on her daughter's hair. She did not, for a long moment, draw her hand away. She said very quietly, "Mariana, child, fetch me the writing case from my bedchamber." "Yes, Mamma." Mariana went. Augusta sat looking into the fire. She did not, in the interval, find the small finishing laugh. The dinner on Thursday went forward at 6:30 in the dining room at Helmsby Hall. The room had been opened, the long table laid, the silver brought out, the venison cooked, the candles burned in their branches above the brass dividers Sir Charles had made by a Birmingham silversmith the year of his baronetcy. The dividers were the long brass dolphin-shaped pieces that ran the length of the table and separated dish from dish. Old plate of a kind that had been carried at Helmsby Hall since Sir Charles's grandfather's day, when the grandfather had been only a man of trade. The dolphins on the dividers were tarnished at the lip and bright at the tail, as old brass dolphins always are. The Pettifords arrived at 6. Mr. Edmund Foley arrived with the vicar. Augusta received them at the porch. She received them in the dark gold silk she had worn at Mariana's launching. She received them without the laugh. The Duke of Ashcombe arrived at 1:15, riding the bay up from the village. He gave the horse to the head groom. He came into the porch in his black evening coat, with the small silver pin his great aunt had given him at her last Christmas, pinned at his cravat. He bowed to Augusta. He bowed to Mrs. Pettiford. He bowed to the vicar. He bowed very correctly to Mr. Edmund Foley. Mr. Foley bowed back. His bow was a fraction lower than the company warranted, and a fraction quicker than the moment required. Sir Charles came down from his dressing-room at the hearth. He took his place at the head of the table. He set the company. The Duke was on his right. Clara was between the Duke and Mariana. Mrs. Pettiford was opposite the Duke. The vicar was at Augusta's right, Mr. Foley was at the foot of the table on Augusta's left. The place reserved, in the geometry, Augusta had taught Mariana for the gentleman in whose name a small announcement is to be made. Sir Charles raised his glass at the soup. "Friends," he said, "I shall, with your indulgence, take a small interval before the venison to make an announcement which my wife and I, and my niece, and our guest of the evening have agreed shall be made at this table." He looked round once. "My niece, Miss Clara Whitfield, has done His Grace the Duke of Ashcombe the honour of accepting his hand. The Duke and Miss Whitfield are to be married. The marriage will, with His Grace's leave, be solemnized at the Church of St. Margaret's, Helmsby, in the early spring. I shall ask you to drink with me to the Duke and his bride." The vicar drank, Mrs. Pettiford drank, Mariana drank, Augusta drank. Mr. Edmund Foley raised his glass. He drank. He set the glass down with the small, careful motion of a man who has been told, between the porch and the soup, what announcement is to be made, and who has had perhaps 20 minutes to find the face he is to wear while it is made. "Sir Charles," Mr. Foley said, "Your Grace, Miss Whitfield, I'm very happy to drink your health." The company drank to that also. The venison came in. The dinner went on. The vicar, who had been the curate at Helmsby St. Margaret's before he was the vicar there, said the small, careful things that a vicar succeeds at the table of a baronet whose niece has just been engaged to a duke. Mrs. Pettiford, on the venison, asked Clara very politely about the second Carmichael ring, which she had been told of, on the porch by Augusta. The ring was at Clara's left hand, on the white linen napkin in her lap. She drew the napkin back. She showed Mrs. Pettiford the ring. Mrs. Pettiford admired the sapphire. The vicar admired the work. The dinner went forward. Mr. Foley spoke very little. He drank a little less than he had been used to drinking at the curate's table. He ate the venison with very small, careful cuts. He looked, when he thought no one was looking, at Mariana. Mariana twice met his eye. She did not twice look away. After the cheese, Augusta rose. She drew the ladies into the drawing-room. The gentlemen sat 10 minutes longer over their port. The Duke spoke with Sir Charles on the Carmichael cottage roof. The vicar joined them. Mr. Foley sat at the foot of the table with his glass and said nothing of consequence, and rose when the others rose. In the drawing-room, Augusta sat by the fire. Mrs. Pettiford sat at the small piano. Mariana sat on the stool at her mother's knee. Clara stood at the window with her sapphire under her glove. Augusta said, "Mrs. Pettiford, will you play?" Mrs. Pettiford played. She played the small handle air she had been playing at the drawing-room of Helmsby Hall for 15 years. The air was familiar. The dinner went on toward its quiet close. The vicar, his wife, and Mr. Foley left at the 9:30. The Duke remained an hour longer. He sat with Sir Charles by the fire. He bowed to Augusta. He took Clara's hand at the porch. He rode down to the village. The Helmsby Arms held its candle in the window all night, in the way Mr. Cox was used to holding it for guests of the rank of a duke. The fortnight that followed was, at Helmsby Hall, the quietest fortnight in 3 years. Sir Charles rode at dawn. The Duke walked up from the inn at 10. He took breakfast with the family. He walked with Clara in the kitchen garden and the lime walk, and along the lane to St. Margaret's. He did not, by Augusta's express request, sit beside Clara at meals where Augusta could not see them both at once. He sat opposite. He asked Augusta's leave in every matter of household arrangement that touched his presence. Augusta gave the leave with the small, precise courtesy she had practiced the morning after the dinner. She did not, in the fortnight, find the laugh again. In the kitchen garden, on the second morning, Theodore Carmichael told Clara at last about the leather case and the long ride. He told her about the portrait of his father above the study fireplace, and about the small letter he had addressed to the portrait the morning he had set out. He told her about Lady Edith and the codicil. He told her about the Bay's mother, and the small Carmichael gesture of the gloved knuckle. He told her in such terms as a man of his name owes to a woman of hers. Several other things he had not, in the morning-room 3 days before, found a way to tell her. Clara, on the bench by the espaliered pears, listened. She had not, before that morning, heard him speak so long together. She watched the small motion of his thumb on the rim of the signet ring, which had begun and steadied while he spoke and had ended at the end of the speaking. "Quite still," she said. "Your Grace, you shall, in the kitchen garden, call me Theodore. The kitchen garden is, by old county usage, a Christian name room. I had not heard the usage. It is a usage I have at present invented. I should be obliged if you would honor it, Theodore. That is better." She smiled. He smiled also. It was the smile, she observed, of a man who had been waiting 2 years for the small permission of a Christian name in a kitchen garden, and had not, until the present morning, been quite certain it would come. On the third morning, Mariana joined them at breakfast. She did so without her mother's leave and without Augusta speaking against it. Mariana had taken, since the dinner, to coming to breakfast in a plain morning dress instead of the primrose. She had taken to sitting at her father's right hand. She had taken, in the same week, to writing letters in the morning-room desk that had been Clara's. She did not, in those letters, tell anyone what was in them. Sir Charles, who saw her sealing one of them with the Helmsby seal on the Friday morning, did not ask. Clara, who came in with the cambric on the Friday afternoon, to find Mariana at the desk, with a letter and a small folded paper at her elbow that Clara recognized as her own old handwriting, asked. Mariana looked up. The small folded paper at her elbow had been written by Clara at Augusta's compulsion 3 weeks before Mr. Foley had been brought down to the village. It was a polite note declining an invitation to dine at the curate's. The note had been 3 lines long. Clara had not signed it more particularly than as your most obliged, Clara Whitfield. The note had gone to Mr. Foley by the vicar's hand a fortnight ago. Clara had not, on signing it, expected to see it again. Mariana said, "Cousin, where did you get the note?" "From Mr. Foley's lodging at the village." "Mariana, I went to it yesterday. I went because I had been a fool, cousin, the spring before last, and I had a private understanding with Mr. Foley that I had not, on the morning of the dinner, drawn close enough to a close. I went to his lodging to draw it close. He was at Salisbury for the day. His landlady let me wait in the parlour. I waited. I did not in the parlour sit quite still. There were 3 letters on the writing table. One of them was yours. I took it. Mariana, you took a letter from a man's writing table." "Yes, cousin, I took it." He had been showing the letter to my mother's friends. He had been showing the letter to my mother. He had been telling my mother, very quietly, that the letter was the beginning of an understanding he had been pursuing with you since the spring before last. He had been telling Mama, this past month, that he had been understood by you to be on the brink of an offer. He had brought the letter down with him from Salisbury for that purpose. I took it. Mariana lifted the small folded paper. "Cousin, read it now. Tell me whether it is what he had been telling Mama it was." Clara took the note. She read it. The note was 3 lines long. The note declined an invitation to dine at the curate's on a Friday 3 weeks before the dinner just passed. The note was, as Clara had written it, polite. The note was nothing else. "It is, Mariana, what I wrote. He had been telling Mamma this past month that it was the beginning of an understanding. It is no understanding. I know that, cousin. I have known it since I read it on his table yesterday. I have it now. I shall not at present give it back to him. I shall give it to my father this evening. Mariana and cousin, there is another thing. Mamma has, since the dinner, written to her cousin Lady Constance Greville in London. The letter went on Saturday. I have not been told what was in it. I have been told only that it went." Clara was silent. She looked at the small folded paper in her own hand. The paper bore, in the upper right corner, the postmaster's stamp from the village office. The date inked in the postmaster's careful hand, 3 weeks before the dinner just passed. The stamp was unambiguous. The date was unambiguous. The note was, by the postmaster's stamp, what Clara had written it as. She said, "Mariana, I shall keep the note. I shall this evening take it with me when your father has Mr. Foley to his study. You shall not need to take it. My father has already sent for Mr. Foley. Mr. Foley is to come at 4. I shall be at my father's elbow. Mariana, does your mother know?" "My mother does not at present know. She shall know, cousin, when I have told her at 6. Clara set the note in the small drawer of the writing desk that had held the leather case the morning of the Duke's arrival. She turned the key. She said, "Mariana, you are very different from the cousin I had at this house a fortnight ago." "I am not different, cousin. I am at last in the right room of the same house. I have been in the wrong rooms 3 years. I shall not, by my own choosing, be in them another." She rose. She went out of the morning room. Her skirt today, a plain dove-coloured stuff, made no sound on the floor. That afternoon, at 4, Edmund Foley came to the south porch of Helmsby Hall, on foot from the village. He was shown into Sir Charles's study. Sir Charles was at the writing table, with the small folded note Clara had given Mariana at 3. Mariana was at her father's elbow. Mr. Foley was given a chair. He sat. He was, the head groom afterward said in the stable-yard to cook, very pale. The conversation in the study took half an hour. The door was closed. The voices were not raised. At 4:30 the door opened. Mr. Foley came out. He did not, on the steps, find a footman to hand him to a carriage. He walked. He took the lane to the village, at a pace that was not the pace of a man going home to a settled lodging. In the study, Sir Charles sat at his desk a moment longer. Mariana sat at his elbow. The note lay between them. The postmaster's stamp on the upper right corner, the polite 3-line declination beneath. Sir Charles said, "Daughter, father. I shall not on this matter write to your cousin Lady Constance directly. The Duke shall write to her. I shall send a copy of this note to my own solicitor. I shall, in such time as is required, see this matter settled, Mr. Foley shall not, while I am at Helmsby Hall, be received here again. No, father. Will you, Mariana, go to your mother?" "Yes, father." Mariana went. She found her mother in the gallery at the first floor, in front of the small portrait that had hung at the gallery's east end for 31 years. The portrait was of Mary Whitfield, Clara's mother, Augusta's elder sister, painted at the age of 19, the year before she had married a curate of Helmsby Saint. Margaret's against the wishes of every member of her family, except her own grandmother and a small dog of indeterminate breed, which had been buried in the kitchen garden the year afterward. Augusta was standing at perhaps 3 paces from the portrait. Her hand was not raised. She was not exactly looking at the face. She was looking at the shoulder of the gown and at the small pearl pin at the throat. The pearl pin was, in fact, in Augusta's own jewel case in the bedchamber. Augusta had it of her mother on the day of Mary's wedding, the day Mary had refused to be married in it. Mariana stopped at the foot of the small stair, at perhaps 7 paces from her mother. She did not at once speak. Augusta did not at once turn. After a long moment, Augusta said, very quietly, without turning, "Mariana." "Mama." "Come up." Mariana came up. She stood at her mother's elbow. Augusta did not look at her. Augusta said, "I have been here, child, perhaps 20 minutes. I have not in 20 minutes decided what I was looking for. Mamma, I do not, child, recommend the practice. It is the practice of a woman who has not been honest in her own house for a long time. Mamma, Mariana, the note you took at the lodging." "Yes, Mamma, it is, I take it, what your cousin had written it as." "Yes, Mamma, and what Mr. Foley had told me of it was, not what it is, no, Mamma." Augusta was silent. Her hand on the gallery rail moved a fraction up and then a fraction down. Her gold ring caught the light from the window at the gallery's south end. She said, very quietly, "I shall write this evening to my cousin Lady Constance Greville in London." "Yes, Mamma, I shall write to her in the same hand as the letter that went on Saturday, and I shall withdraw, sentence by sentence, what I wrote on Saturday." "Yes, Mamma." "Mariana." "Child, leave me a quarter of an hour." Mariana drew breath. She had a sentence prepared, a small kind sentence, which she had practiced on the gallery rail at the top of the stair. She did not, in the moment, speak it. She curtsied instead, very low in the way her mother had taught her at the age of 7 to curtsy to her elders. She went away down the gallery. She did not look back. Clara, who had come up the small stair from the morning room at perhaps 4:15 with a household question for her aunt, had stopped at the small landing where the stair met the gallery. She had stopped at the precise moment Mariana had stopped at the foot of the gallery's small stair. She had seen, between the gallery rail and the small portrait, her aunt's face turned 3/4 away from her own. She had seen the small motion of the gold ring on her aunt's hand. She had heard, very faintly, the 2 sentences her aunt had said to her own daughter about a practice not recommended. She had not moved. She had not, in the small interval, made the small, careful motion of the cambric in her left hand. When Mariana came down the gallery and saw her at the small landing, Mariana did not, by any motion of her own, signal that her cousin had been there. Mariana passed her, with the small dove-colored rustle of skirt that made no sound on the floor. Mariana went down the stair. Clara stood at the landing a moment longer. She did not in the moment go up. She turned. She went down the small stair. She went out at the porch. She walked the lime walk to the bench at the halfway, and sat there until the Duke came up from the inn at 5:30. He sat beside her on the bench he had been riding. His cravat was loose at one fold. His thumb was at his signet ring. He said, "You are very quiet." "I have been quiet this afternoon on a matter I had not until today seen. You shall, if you wish, tell me. You shall, if you do not wish, not tell me. I shall be content either way." Clara sat a moment looking at the bay being walked in slow figures at the end of the lime walk by the head groom. She said at last, very quietly, "Theodore, my aunt has been, this afternoon, in front of a small portrait in the gallery. The portrait is of my mother. My aunt has not, for as long as I have been in this house, stood in front of the portrait so long." He did not at once speak. He sat with her until she was ready to go in. On the Sunday after morning service at St. Margaret's, Theodore drove Clara to Carmichael Cottage in the gig his great-aunt had used to drive about the lanes of Wiltshire for 30 years. The gig was old and well cared for. The pony was a small chestnut named Ginger, who had been Lady Edith's last animal. Clara had not, since Lady Edith's funeral, sat in the gig. The cottage lay 6 miles southwest by the by-road. The road ran along the edge of a beechwood for 2 of the miles, by a chalk stream for 1 mile, and through 3 small fords. The day held clear and pale. The hedgerows were quiet in their autumn brown. The rooks were quiet over the beechwood. Theodore drove. Clara sat at his elbow, the rug across her knees, her hands quiet on the rug. They came up to the cottage at the small painted gate at the foot of the lilac walk. Theodore handed Clara down. He led Ginger into the small paddock. He came back. He stood at the gate. He said, "I have not been here since the funeral. The hedge has been cut last Monday. The chimney was swept on Wednesday. The garden has not been touched. I had not been sure whether you would wish it touched. I had not wished it touched. Just so. I had judged it likely. I sent the steward away again." He opened the gate. They walked up the path. The lilac walk was the path that ran from the gate to the cottage door between 2 old lilac bushes. Lady Edith's mother had planted in 1790. The bushes were bare now, their grey twigs holding the small hard buds that would, in April, open. Clara had walked the lilac walk every afternoon of the 6 weeks she had nursed Lady Edith. She had walked it twice with Theodore in those weeks. She knew the small worn place at the corner of the 2nd flagstone where the moss had been scraped by Lady Edith's stick. They came to the cottage door. Theodore drew the small key from his coat pocket. He set it in the lock. He paused. "Clara, Theodore, you shall. When the lilacs come out, have it as you would like it. I shall make no choice for you. If you wish the cottage shut up, it shall be shut up. If you wish it lived in, I shall have the steward keep 2 rooms for our afternoons. If you wish it given to the parish for the schoolmistress's use, it shall go to the parish on the day after Easter. It is yours to dispose of in the way you wish. I shall not give it to the parish. I had hoped you would not." He turned the key. They went in. The cottage was as Lady Edith had left it. The small parlour with the green Sheraton chairs, the writing table at the window where she had corrected Theodore's Latin since he was 7, the small library through the door at the back, 3 walls of books, and a fire that had not been lit since September. The kitchen lay at the side. The garden at the back ran down to a small wall and a view of the chalk down beyond. The lilac walk was at the front, where they had come up. They went into the parlour. Theodore lit the fire that had been laid at his order on Friday last. The fire took. He drew Clara a chair. He drew himself a chair opposite. He set a small kettle on the hob. There was tea in the canister on the mantel. There were biscuits in the tin on the table. The biscuits had been put there on Friday last also. He made tea. He brought her a cup. He sat down opposite her. "Clara, Theodore. This is, you may find this useful to know, the first afternoon since the title fell to me 2 years ago, that I have sat in this parlour without preparing, in my head, the next sentence I should say. I had observed. Had you? I had. You have. this last quarter of an hour, not been once at your signet ring." He looked at his own hand on his knee, the thumb of his right hand, which had spent 2 years passing over the rim of the signet ring at every difficult moment of every day, was at this present 1:15, quite still. "That is true. I was glad to observe it," he smiled. The smile was, Clara noticed, the smile of a man whose face had not, in the previous 2 years, given the smile much occupation. The smile took a small additional moment to settle. He said, "Clara, I have a small thing to confess to you. I had not, in the morning room at Helmsby Hall, told you the full account of my great-aunt's instructions about the giving of the ring." "Had you not?" "I had not. My great-aunt's instructions were these. I was, when I had decided to come, to ride down by the Bridgewater Road on the bay. I was to take the small leather case in the inner pocket of my riding coat. I was to present myself at Helmsby Hall in the morning hour, at which the household had set its day in order, but not yet sat down to its noon. I was to ask for the morning room, not the small saloon. I was to set the case upon your writing desk. I was to stand at 4 feet and not at 3. I was, having done all this, to ask my question in such words as I should find on the morning, not in such words as I should rehearse in advance. That was the full instruction. That was the full instruction. It was not, Theodore, a very onerous instruction. It was, Clara, the most onerous instruction my great-aunt had given me in 21 years of her giving me instructions. I had rehearsed the morning before I rode out, an alternative speech which contained the phrase, "My dear Miss Whitfield, I am, in coming, to fulfill the express wish of my late great-aunt, who was, as you will recall, exceedingly fond of you." I had rehearsed it 4 times in the looking-glass at Ashcombe. I had been pleased with it on the 2nd rehearsal. I had on the 4th seen quite plainly what was the matter with it. Clara. It was, my dear, the speech of a man who had come to fulfill his great-aunt's wishes. It was not the speech of a man who had come to ask his own question. I had thrown it away on the road. I had ridden in to Helmsby Hall on the Tuesday morning with no speech at all. You had observed, perhaps, the consequence. I had. You had, your grace, stopped at 4 paces and not 3. I had. It was, I shall confess to you, the only piece of my great-aunt's instruction I had managed in the room. The rest I had fabricated. Clara laughed. The laugh was not loud. It was the small, clear laugh of a curate's daughter, who had not, in 3 years under her uncle's roof, had reason for any laugh at all. "Theodore," she said, "I had thought you, at 4 paces, the most accomplished gentleman in Wiltshire. I had thought myself, that morning, the worst prepared duke in 3 counties. I had thought, between the morning-room door and the writing desk, of asking you whether I might be excused half an hour to write my speech down. I should have given you the half-hour. You should not have given me the half-hour. You should have given me the answer. You did. I was, in the end, grateful for the giving." She set her cup down. She looked at him across the small parlor fire. She said very quietly, "Theodore, tell me the speech you had thrown away on the road." He laughed. The laugh was, Clara observed, the second of his life that she had heard. The first had been on the Wednesday morning in the kitchen garden, when she had told him about Mariana's primrose yellow gown. The second was now. The laugh was short, dry, surprised by itself. "My dear," he said, "I shall not." The speech was very bad. The speech, in fact, contained a Latin tag I had misread in your hearing 4 years ago at Lady Edith's bedside. You had corrected me at the time. I had remembered the correction. I had put the corrected tag the morning of the rehearsals back into the speech in the uncorrected form. I had not, until the 4th rehearsal, observed that I had done so. "Which tag? My dear, you shall mortify me. You have told me the speech contained a misread Latin tag. You have not told me which tag. I shall in this parlor not let you off." "Clara, which tag, Theodore?" he sighed. The sigh was the sigh of a man who has, against his own better judgment, agreed to mortify himself in his great-aunt's parlour at the hands of a curate's daughter. He said, "Tempora mutantur et nos mutamur in illis." She drew breath. She looked at him with the slow, steady look she had given him at Lady Edith's bedside the day he had first said it. She said, "Theodore, the tag is, in itself, correctly transcribed. The tag is, in fact, accurate Latin." "Yes. What was the misreading? I had said in your hearing 4 years ago, tempora mutamur et nos mutantur in illis. I had transposed the persons. You corrected me with such great gentleness that I had not, until I was half a mile down the road from your father's grave on the day after the funeral, understood that I had been corrected at all." Clara laughed. She laughed longer this time. She put her cup down on the small table. She laughed until her shoulders moved with it. "Theodore Carmichael," she said, "you are very vain. You are very vain of your Latin. You have been telling yourself since you were 7 that you were the family's best Latinist. You have not been. I have not been. You have been the family's second-best Latinist. The family's best Latinist was your great-aunt. The family's third-best Latinist was your sister. And the family's fourth-best Latinist. Your father, I imagine. My father had no Latin at all. My father had, instead, an exceptional eye for a horse, and at this moment, in the parlour, I had been about to tell you that you were the family's fourth-best Latinist by birth, and the family's first by marriage. That is, Theodore, a very flattering Latin." "It is the kind of Latin," Theodore said. "I had been wanting to speak in this parlour for some considerable time." They sat. The kettle on the hob ticked. The fire shifted its small coals. Outside the window, the lilac walk waited in its bare grey twigs for the April which would, in 5 months, open its first buds. He said, very quietly, looking into the fire, "When the lilacs come out, we shall come down by the Bridgewater Road, and we shall walk this path again. The hedge will be in. The chalk stream will be bright. I shall, by then, have the second mortgage at Ashcombe quite retired. We shall sit in this parlour the way we are sitting now, and I shall tell you, very plainly, the Latin tags I have been afraid of. You shall correct them all," Clara said. "I shall." She did not, in that moment, say anything else. On the Monday morning, the morning after the gig had brought them back from Carmichael Cottage in the early dusk, a closed travelling carriage drawn by 4 greys came up the carriage drive of Helmsby Hall at 20 minutes past 10. The carriage bore on its panel the small painted device of the Greville family of Grosvenor Square, an azure shield with 3 silver swans. The coachman on the box was in Greville livery. The footman at the back was in the same livery. The carriage had come up from London by the Marlborough Road. It had been 3 days on the road. It had stopped twice. It had not, before this morning, been announced. Augusta Helmsby, who was at the small writing table in the morning room with the second draft of her retraction letter to her cousin Lady Constance Greville before her, looked out at the carriage with the small, slow blankness of a woman who has been writing to someone she had not expected to see arrive. She rose. She drew on her cap. She went out into the porch. Robert the under-butler was already at the porch door. Robert had already, by the time Augusta reached him, glanced once at the panel of the carriage, once at the livery of the coachman, and once at his own master's library door at the south end of the gallery, behind which Sir Charles Helmsby, who had not, on the Monday morning, ridden to sessions, was at his accounts. "Robert," said Augusta, "send to Sir Charles directly." "Yes, my lady." The footman at the back of the carriage drew the steps down. The carriage door was opened. Lady Constance Greville descended. She was a woman of 63, very straight-backed, very thin, very dark-eyed, in a deep slate-grey travelling gown, and a small black bonnet, trimmed with the smallest possible band of grey ribbon. She had been the dowager queen of 3 London drawing-rooms for 30 years. She had been the gatekeeper at Almack's for 14. She had, in person, the small, precise authority of a woman who had not, in any of those years, expected to be disagreed with. She drew off her gloves at the carriage step. She did not look up at Augusta. She gave the gloves to her footman. "Lady Helmsby," she said, "I had not announced myself. I shall not, on this errand, have been expected. I shall, with your indulgence, take a small interval with you in your small saloon before I have the matter explained to me by anyone else. Cousin Constance. In the small saloon, my dear. I shall not take a quarter of an hour. I shall not stay to dine." Augusta drew breath. She gave her cousin her arm. They went, the two of them, along the gallery to the small saloon. Robert closed the door behind them. He went, at his master's previously given direction, directly to the library. Inside the small saloon, Lady Constance did not sit. She stood at the fireplace. She did not draw off her bonnet. She turned to face her cousin Augusta, with the small, clean motion of a woman who has rehearsed 3 different sentences on the road and has decided, between Marlborough and the lodge gate, which of the 3 to use. "My dear," she said, "I had your letter on the Sunday morning. I had your second letter on the Monday at breakfast. I had your husband's note this morning at the change at Marlborough. I had Theodore Carmichael's letter this morning also, at the change at Marlborough, by his own hand, which had been waiting for me at my own house in London the same morning. I have, my dear, read all 4. I have read your second letter, as you may wish to know, 3 times. Augusta sat down on the small chair by the fire. "Cousin Constance, my dear, I am not in the habit, you may have observed in our girlhood, of taking the road from London in October without an extremely particular reason. Cousin, I have taken the road this once, on no particular reason except this. The matter you were good enough to write of to me on the Saturday is, on the evidence of your second letter, not what you had on the Saturday supposed it to be. The matter, as I now understand it from Theodore Carmichael's own letter to me, is that he has been engaged these 3 weeks past to your niece, Miss Whitfield, with your husband's full agreement, on the express wish of his great-aunt, Lady Edith Ashcombe, who was, you may not have known, a very close friend of my own mother's. I had, on the Sunday morning, been disposed to write to Theodore at Ashcombe, asking him to consider his sister's London season. I had by Monday been undisposed. I had by yesterday been certain. I have, by this Monday morning, no purpose in coming here whatever except this. I shall, before I drive on to Ashcombe to make Theodore's acquaintance, ask leave to pay my respects to Miss Whitfield." She drew breath. She looked at Augusta directly. Augusta did not look up. "My dear cousin," Lady Constance said, very quietly, "I have written, this morning at the inn at Marlborough by my own hand, a small note to the editor of the Morning Chronicle on the matter you had wished me to convey to him at the start of the week. The note is in my reticule. I shall, with your permission, send it on by the next post. I had not, until I had your second letter, understood what it was you wished the Chronicle to be told. I understand now. The note shall go this afternoon. The Chronicle, as you may know, prints what I send it, on the matter of the tons small Octobers, with very little revision. The matter shall be ended on Wednesday's page. I had been concerned between Marlborough and the lodge gate, only that the matter had not been printed before I could send the note. The matter, I have established at the change at the village this morning, has not been printed. We are, my dear, by the smallest possible margin before our time." Augusta did not speak. "My dear cousin," Lady Constance said, "I have come up the road. You may also wish to know, because I had been disposed, at 6 o'clock yesterday morning over my breakfast tray, to come and speak with you in private, about a small matter from our girlhood that I had not in 50 years given an afternoon to. The matter has to do with my mother's friendship with Lady Edith Ashcombe, and with what I had supposed, 50 years ago, of your elder sister Mary's marriage to her curate. I shall not, my dear, raise the matter today. I shall raise it, if you will permit me, in the spring, at my own house in London, with your daughter Mariana present. I have been told, by Theodore in his letter to me, that your daughter Mariana is, this autumn, a very fine young woman who has taken the conduct of her own life into her own hands at the small age of 19. I should be glad to know her in London. I shall ask her to my house in the spring. I shall, my dear, ask you too. Augusta lifted her face. She was, Clara would learn afterwards from Mariana, who had been on the small stair at the south end of the gallery at the precise moment the small saloon door had closed, very pale. She said, after a moment, in the smallest voice Mariana had ever heard her mother use, "Cousin Constance, you are very kind." "I am, my dear, in this room at this hour, not particularly kind. I am in this room at this hour less unkind than I have been. They are not exactly the same thing." She drew off her bonnet at last. She set it on the mantel. She turned and crossed the rug to her cousin, and laid her gloved hand on Augusta's shoulder. The hand stayed perhaps half a minute. Neither of them spoke. Augusta did not weep. Lady Constance did not, in any visible way, soften her face. Then she drew her hand back. She said, "Now, my dear, will you take me to your niece? I shall not have ridden 3 days from London to fail to make her acquaintance before I have my dinner." Augusta rose. She went out of the small saloon at her cousin's elbow. She found Clara in the morning room, with Mariana at her side, both of them having heard, through the open gallery door, perhaps half of what had been said in the small saloon, and having heard, undoubtedly, the half that mattered. Augusta said, in the perfectly clear voice of a woman who had been taught at the age of 9 how to give an introduction in her own house, "Cousin Constance, my niece, Miss Clara Whitfield, who is, this spring, to be the Duchess of Ashcombe, my daughter Mariana Helmsby. Cousin, your cousin Lady Constance Greville." Lady Constance bowed to Clara. The bow was the bow of a London dowager to a young woman she had decided, on the road, was worth the bow. Clara curtsied. Mariana curtsied. Lady Constance said, "Miss Whitfield, I had your great aunt-to-be by marriage as a particular friend of my own mother's. Edith Ashcombe was, my dear, the most exacting Latinist of my acquaintance for 60 years. I take it she corrected your Latin as well," Clara said very quietly. "She had no need, ma'am. My father had already corrected it. She corrected my Greek." Lady Constance's face, which had not moved since Marlborough, moved a fraction. She said, in the voice of a woman who has discovered, at the bottom of an unfamiliar stair, a step she had not expected to find solid, "Miss Whitfield, we shall, I think, do very well together." Lady Constance stayed 3 nights at Helmsby Hall. She took her dinner with the family on each of them. She asked Sir Charles, on the 2nd night, about the South Meadow drainage, and listened to his answer the whole way through. She asked Mariana, on the 3rd night, whether she had read Mrs. Edgeworth's last, and listened to that answer too. She did not, in the 3 nights, address one direct sentence to Augusta which contained the word forgiveness, and she did not. She did not, in the 3 nights, address one which did not. She left on Friday morning for the Carmichael estate in Wiltshire, where she meant to give the Duke's mother the report of Clara she had ridden 3 days from London to be able to give. She left also a thing she had not announced she would leave. She left on the small writing table in the morning room the silver-bound prayer book that had belonged to Edith Ashcombe, the great aunt-to-be by marriage who had corrected Greek. There was an inscription on the inside cover, in a hand neither Clara nor Mariana could read at first, because it was Greek, and there was, under it, in Lady Constance's larger and rounder hand, the translation, "She who hath set her foot upon the threshold need not, after all, return for the lamp." Lady Constance had written, under the translation, in her own hand, "For my cousin Augusta Helmsby, who will know what to do with this, C.G." Augusta found it on Friday after the carriage had gone. She stood in the morning room a long time with the book in her hand. She did not then take it to Clara. She took it, instead, to her own small writing table in her own dressing room, and set it on the corner where she kept the letters from her sister Mary that she had never been able to throw away. What followed in the next 4 days was not visible at the dinner table. Augusta came down. She poured the tea. She asked after Mariana's headache. She did not, in the 4 days, say one sharp thing to anyone in her own house. The change was small enough that Sir Charles, who was not by nature observant of his wife in this particular way, did not notice it. Mariana noticed it. Clara noticed it. Neither of them, having been schooled now by some weeks of practice in the difference between an apology you make in words and one you make by not making certain other words, said anything about it. They let her come down. They let her pour the tea. They let her ask after Mariana's headache. The apology in Augusta's house had begun. It was on the Tuesday following Lady Constance's departure that the letter came from Hertfordshire. Robert brought it in on the late post tray at the breakfast hour. He set it, as he always set the Carmichael letters now, at the place at the table where the Duke would, if he had ridden over from the cottage, have been sitting, and Clara, who had not expected the letter to be addressed to her, picked it up and broke the seal. It was not from the Duke. It was from Lord Hervey Carmichael of Wenfold Park in Hertfordshire, the senior cousin of the Carmichael line, whom Theo had once described to Clara at the Lime Walk as a man who has done the entail the courtesy of reading it, which has not been the family habit. The letter was 3 pages. The handwriting was the handwriting of a man who had been at the writing desk a long time the night before. The substance, when stripped of the courtesies, Lord Hervey was a courteous man, and the courtesies were the courtesies of a man who knew he was about to do an unkind thing. Was this? There was, in the Carmichael settlement of 1761, a clause concerning the descent of Wenfold, and of 3 lesser properties attached to it, which, on the proper reading, required that the head of the senior branch, that is, the Duke, be either married to, or contracted in marriage with, a woman whose father had been in the male line a peer or the heir to a peerage. Lord Hervey had had the clause read by his own man of business, and then by Mr. Pownall of Lincoln's Inn. The 2 readings agreed. Miss Whitfield's father. Lord Hervey wrote the sentence in the courteous voice of a man who had set down the pen between each clause, had been a clergyman of good family, but neither a peer nor the son of a peer. The marriage, as proposed, would forfeit Wenfold and the 3 properties from the Duke's line in favour of Lord Hervey's on the Duke's death without issue by a qualifying wife. Lord Hervey was not, the letter said, in any way pressing the point for his own sake. He had, the letter said, never wished to inherit Wenfold, and would, much rather, for the rest of his days, have a cousin at it whom he could visit in the partridge season. But he was, the letter said, obliged by the duties of the head of the cadet branch to communicate the reading to the Duke at the earliest opportunity, and to leave the further course of the matter to the Duke's own judgment, and to Miss Whitfield's. He had, he wrote, sent the same letter by the same post to the Duke at Carmichael Cottage. Clara read the letter twice. She set it on the table. She poured Sir Charles's tea, because Sir Charles was at the sideboard and had not yet sat down. She buttered a piece of bread. She lifted it to her mouth. She did not, at the small inward shiver that took her at the 3rd clause, set it down. She finished the piece of bread. She poured her own tea. She drank it. She asked Mariana, in a voice Mariana would afterwards say was the precise voice in which her cousin had always asked her, whether she meant to call at the parsonage that morning. Mariana said she did. Clara said she would walk down with her after breakfast. She did not tell Sir Charles about the letter. She did not tell Augusta. She put the letter into the pocket of her morning gown, and she walked, after breakfast, down the lane with Mariana, and at the parsonage gate she said she had a small errand at Mr. Pettiford's lodging and would come back for Mariana at the church porch in a quarter of an hour. She walked to Pettiford's lodging. She did not go in. She walked past it, to the stile at the end of the lane, and she stood at the stile with her hand on the top bar and her face turned away from the village. She did not weep. She did not, in the half-hour at the stile, weep. She thought, with the small, clear part of her mind that had been the clergyman's daughter at the Hertfordshire vicarage, and would, she suspected, always be the clergyman's daughter at the Hertfordshire vicarage, about Wenfold. She had been at Wenfold once with her father, when she was 12, and her father had ridden over to consult Lord Hervey's library on a point of patristic Greek. She remembered the south front. She remembered the great cedar on the lawn. She remembered the line of family portraits in the long gallery, every one of them a Carmichael, and she remembered her father saying afterwards, at supper at the inn, that a man who undid an entail of that age out of personal preference would be undoing more than an entail. She thought about the Duke. She thought about him at the lime walk, asking her in his careful first sentence. She thought about him at the little side table at Helmsby Hall, sliding the second ring across to her. She thought about him at the kitchen garden last Wednesday, laughing about the Latin. She thought about him at Carmichael Cottage on Saturday, holding her gloved hand at the lilac walk and promising her the spring. She thought, then, the sentence she had been keeping at arm's length since she had broken the seal at breakfast. He had been bred from his cradle to know the worth of Wenfold and to keep it. He had not, in the 8 weeks since he had asked her, said the word entail to her once. She took the letter out of her pocket and read it the third time at the stile. She put it back in her pocket. She walked to the church porch. She collected Mariana. She walked home. She wrote, that night at the small Sheraton writing box in her room, 2 letters. The first was to the Duke at Carmichael Cottage. It was 4 sentences. She wrote, in the steadiest hand she could find, your cousin Lord Hervey Carmichael has written to me at Helmsby Hall by the same post as to yourself. I have read the letter, and I have understood it. I shall be, until you have had time to consider the matter without me at your elbow, at Mrs. Talbot's at Wells, where I have an aunt of my mother's. I shall be there a fortnight. After that, I shall be at the vicarage at Hertfordshire, where my mother's brother is still incumbent. Theo, I write your name on this once because I shall not, in any letter that follows it, write it again until you have written first. She did not sign it, Clara. She signed it C. Whitfield. She sealed it with the small wax stick she had used for every letter she had written at Helmsby since she had come, and she set it on the corner of the writing box. The second letter was to Sir Charles, and it was 3 sentences, and it said in the steadiest hand she could find that she had had a letter that morning which made it necessary for her to consult her own conscience away from Helmsby for a fortnight, that she had written to Mrs. Talbot at Wells and would be on the morning coach, and that she begged him, whom she would call her uncle in every other letter she should send him for the rest of her life, to allow her this fortnight without coming after her or sending after her, because she would not, if he came, be able to think the thing through. She signed it, your grateful niece, Clara Whitfield. She left both letters on the writing box. She packed into the small portmanteau Mariana had lent her 3 gowns and her father's prayer book, and the second Carmichael ring on its blue ribbon at her throat under her travelling collar. She did not take the sapphire on her finger. She set it on a small square of folded paper in the centre of the writing box, with one further line on the paper in her own hand. He had taken the easier road and called it dignity. He had not, in the small interval, written to me first. She put out her candle at 2:20 in the morning. She was on the lane before the maid came in to lay the breakfast fire. She walked the 3 miles to the post road at Cheswick alone, with the portmanteau in her hand and the second ring at her throat under her travelling cloak. And she took the 4 o'clock coach to Wells. When Robert brought up the breakfast tray at 9:30, the bed was made, and the writing box was on the centre of the bed with the 2 letters and the small folded paper and the sapphire in its centre. And the bedroom was empty. The Duke had had his letter from Lord Hervey at Carmichael Cottage at the breakfast hour on the Tuesday by the same post. He had read it twice. He had not, at the second reading, finished his coffee. He had set the cup down on the dresser at the window in the small breakfast parlour, and he had stood at the window the better part of an hour, with the letter folded in his hand and his face turned towards the lime walk. He had then sat down at the writing desk, and he had written 1 letter of 2 pages to Lord Hervey at Wenfold, and he had written 1 letter of 3 sentences to Mr. Pownall of Lincoln's Inn. The letter to Lord Hervey thanked him for his courtesy. The letter said that the Duke was at the present moment unable to come up to London or to Hertfordshire, because he was within the last fortnight of his engagement, but that he would, before he answered the substance of Lord Hervey's letter, be at Lincoln's Inn within the week to consult Mr. Pownall on the reading of the 1761 clause, and would write again from there. The letter to Mr. Pownall asked him, in 3 sentences, to expect the Duke on the Friday morning and to have ready every paper in the firm's keeping touching the Carmichael settlement and the descent of Wenfold. He had then risen from the desk, and he had walked down to the lime walk, and he had stood at the kissing gate at the end of it, and he had. This was the part of the morning he was not afterwards able to give a perfectly clear account of. He had stood at the gate perhaps half an hour without doing anything in particular. He had been thinking of Clara at the lilac walk. He had been thinking of her father's prayer book. He had not in the half-hour written to her. He had thought he would ride over to Helmsby in the afternoon and tell her himself. He had thought that an entail clause was not the sort of thing a man wrote to his betrothed about in a letter. It was the sort of thing he sat down beside her at the small writing table and explained, with the paper in front of them on the table, sentence by clause. He had thought that to write to her about it in 2 pages by post would be, in some way he could not have phrased, a discourtesy of a kind he had been bred not to do. He had been wrong. He understood that he had been wrong when, on the Wednesday morning, with his bag at the door for the road to London and Lincoln's Inn, Pettifoot's boy rode up to the cottage gate at 11:30 with a sealed note from Sir Charles, and the note said that Miss Whitfield had gone yesterday morning to Wells, and that she had left this letter for him, and that Sir Charles would, in honour of what his niece had asked of him, neither follow her nor permit any other person at Helmsby to follow her, but would consider the Duke at liberty to do whatever he, as her promised husband, judged proper. The Duke read Clara's 4 sentences on the gravel by the gate, with the bag of his Lincoln's Inn papers on the gravel at his feet. He read them once. He read the small folded paper at the bottom of the note. Sir Charles, with the discretion of a man who had had the sapphire ring placed in his keeping by his wife the night before, had enclosed it. He read the 1 further line in Clara's hand. He stood then perhaps a minute on the gravel. He picked up the bag. He carried it back into the cottage. He took out the papers for Lincoln's Inn. He took instead his great coat and his riding gloves. He sent the boy back to Sir Charles with 1 sentence in pencil. I go this morning to Wells. He was on the road by noon. He came to Mrs. Talbot's lodging at Wells on the Thursday afternoon, having ridden through the Wednesday night, and slept 4 hours at an inn at Frome. Mrs. Talbot, Clara's mother's elder sister, A small grey woman in a grey gown, who kept 3 rooms above a milliner's in the cathedral close, opened the door herself. She had had Clara in her parlour 2 days, and she had had, in the 2 days, the 4 sentences and the 1 further line. She looked the Duke up and down on her own threshold. She said, "Your Grace, my niece is not at this hour in. She has gone to the cathedral. The afternoon service is at 4. You will find her, I expect, at the south porch when it is out, because she has not, in 2 days, gone into the close by any other door. I shall not, Your Grace, tell you whether to wait for her in my parlour or at the south porch. I shall tell you, however, that I have known my niece since she was at the font, and that she has not, in the 2 days, eaten 1 meal at my table without bringing the 2nd ring out of her travelling cloak and setting it on the table beside her plate and looking at it the whole way through her soup. I leave the inference, Your Grace, to yourself." The Duke took off his hat. He bowed. He said, "Mrs. Talbot, I shall be at the south porch at 5. He was at the south porch at 4:45. He stood on the worn stone under the carved tympanum, with his hat in his hand and his hair, which the road from Frome had not improved, lifting in the wind off the close. The service ended at 5:20. The congregation came out under the porch in the slow way of a country cathedral congregation that had heard the same canticles in the same order for 1200 years. He saw Clara among the last of them, in the grey travelling cloak she had walked out of Helmsby Inn with a 2nd ring on its blue ribbon visible at her throat above the collar. She saw him. She did not stop. She walked the 4 steps from the porch onto the gravel of the close, and she stood on the gravel a yard from him, and she said, very levelly, "Your Grace," he said, "Miss Whitfield, I have not yet been to Lincoln's Inn. I shall not until I have spoken to you. Go. I have one thing to say to you before I say anything else. I had your letter at the cottage gate yesterday morning. I had read it twice before I had taken 3 steps. The line on the small paper was the just line, and I do not here attempt to correct it. I should have written to you on the Tuesday morning, before I rode out of the breakfast parlour. I did not. I have, in the matter of writing first, no defence to offer you that is not the defence of a man who had been bred to put a difficult thing into a conversation rather than into a letter. The breeding does not here excuse the failing." He drew then, from the inner pocket of his coat, the small folded paper she had left in the writing box with the sapphire in its centre. He had brought the paper. He had not brought the ring. He said, "I have come to Wells without the ring, because the ring is yours, and I had no right, having failed to write first, to carry it on the road towards you as if I had not failed. The ring is at Helmsby in your aunt's keeping. It is yours when you choose in your own time to send for it or to come for it. Until you have said otherwise to me in your own voice, I do not wear my own." He held up his right hand. The signet ring he had worn since his father's death, which Clara had seen on his hand at every meeting they had had since the first, was not on his finger. The skin where the ring had been was paler than the skin around it. He had taken it off, she would learn afterwards from Mrs. Talbot at the inn at Frome at 4 in the morning, and he had put it in the small inner pocket of his coat, and he had not put it on again. He said, "I shall be, until you tell me otherwise, at the King's Head in the Market Square. I shall not come to Mrs. Talbot's door again. I shall not come to the south porch at the 4 o'clock service tomorrow. I shall be at the inn. If you wish in the fortnight to send for me, you will send. If you do not, at the end of the fortnight I shall ride to the Hertfordshire vicarage, and I shall say the same things at your uncle's door. The entail at Wenfold, Miss Whitfield, I will speak of when you have asked me to speak of it. I will not, while you have a question of your own to ask me first, put it before yours." He bowed. He set his hat on his head. He walked out of the close by the south gate. Clara stood on the gravel a long moment after he had gone. Then she walked back into Mrs. Talbot's house. She sat down at her aunt's small writing table in her aunt's parlour. She wrote, in her steadiest hand, one sentence on a single sheet of paper. She sealed it. She gave it to Mrs. Talbot's boy. She told him to take it to the King's Head in the market square, and to give it into the Duke's own hand. The sentence said, "Theo, come to my aunt's parlour at 11 tomorrow morning. Bring the ring. Bring both." See, he came at 11. Mrs. Talbot, who had spent the morning at the milliner's downstairs by arrangement, came up at 12:30 to find them in the small grey parlour at her own small grey table. The second Carmichael ring was on Clara's finger. The signet ring was on the Duke's hand. The Hertfordshire letter lay open between them. Between them, too, was a third sheet of paper on which the Duke had been writing, in his careful hand, the line of reasoning he had ridden 3 days to put to her. The line of reasoning had 2 parts. The first was that the 1761 clause was, on Mr. Pownall's reading from the firm's October opinion, which the Duke had brought in his pocket, ambiguous. The qualifying wife clause had been drawn in the language of 1761, and could be answered in the language of 1827, by a Crown grant of a courtesy title to Miss Whitfield, in her own right at the time of the marriage. For that grant the Duke had begun in November to apply, and Lord Hervey, when he sat down with the firm's October opinion in front of him, would, in the Duke's judgment, accept it. The second was the alternative. If Lord Hervey did not accept it, the Duke would, in that case, with Miss Whitfield's leave, suffer Wenfold and the 3 properties to descend at his death to Lord Hervey's line. He would, in that case, settle on Miss Whitfield, in his lifetime, by deed against the contingency, the whole of his unentailed Berkshire property. The Berkshire holding was larger than Wenfold. It had come to the Carmichael line by the marriage of his grandfather, and not by the senior settlement, and on it no clause of any settlement now bore. He had brought on the third sheet the figures. Clara read the sheet of figures. She read the October opinion. She set both on the table. She said, "Theo, take me back to Helmsby. I shall, after we are home, write to Lord Hervey myself," he said. "Will you?" she said. "I shall write to him in Greek." Edith Ashcombe corrected mine. They were back at Helmsby on the Saturday evening. Augusta met them in the hall. She had had Clara's note from Mrs. Talbot's by the previous post, and she had had the Duke's pencil to Sir Charles by Pettiford's boy. And she had had, in the 4 days since Tuesday morning, the longest 4 days of her own house she had had since her sister had died. She did not, at the sight of Clara in the travelling cloak on her own hall floor, weep. She did not embrace her. She did one thing. She took, from the corner of the hall table, where she had set it the moment the carriage had been heard on the gravel, the silver-bound prayer book of Edith Ashcombe, with the Greek inscription and Lady Constance's translation, and she put it into Clara's hands. She said, in her own clear morning-room voice, slightly less morning-room than it had been, "Clara, I am sorry," I said. "On Michaelmas Eve, in this house, in front of 3 persons who had a right to hear me say better the thing I have, in the 7 weeks since, been the most ashamed of saying in my whole life. I shall not in this house say it again. I shall in this house instead say the thing I should have said. You will, my dear, be a duchess, and you will, my dear, be a better one than I should have made." Clara stood with the prayer book in her hands. She said, after a moment, in the voice in which she had once asked Mariana in the library whether Lord Byron was, on the whole, a serious poet, "Aunt Augusta, thank you. I shall keep it on the small writing table at Wenfold." Augusta bowed her head. She did not, then, weep either. She turned, and she went up the great staircase to her own dressing-room, and she closed the door. And she did not, that night, come down to dinner. Mariana came down. Sir Charles came down. The Duke came down, Clara came down. They ate, the 4 of them, in the small dining parlour, the dish of partridge, Mrs. Burridge had had ready since the morning. They spoke of small things. They did not speak of Wenfold. They did not speak of Augusta. At 9 o'clock the Duke rode back to the cottage, and at 9:30 Clara took the silver-bound prayer book up to the spare bedroom Mariana had made up for her with fresh sheets the same afternoon, and she opened it, and she read the inscription in the Greek, and she read Lady Constance's translation, and she set the book on the small writing table at the head of the bed, and she put out her candle. They were married at Helmsby Parish Church on the 3rd Saturday of April, in the warm part of the morning, with the lilacs at the gate of the churchyard just beginning to open. Mariana stood at Clara's right hand. Sir Charles gave her, with the steady hand of a baronet who had had 8 weeks to school it, into the Duke's keeping at the chancel step. Augusta sat in the family pew, and she did not, during the service, look at her husband's hands. She looked at her niece's face, and at her sister's hair on the back of her niece's head, under the small lace cap that had been her sister's. She wept once, very quietly, between the gospel and the address, and Mariana, who was at her elbow, gave her the handkerchief without looking down. Lady Constance Greville came up from London for the day, and stood, after the service, on the gravel at the churchyard gate, and bowed to the new Duchess of Ashcombe with the bow of a London dowager, who had made her decision in the morning room at Helmsby on a Friday afternoon, and had not, in 5 months, seen the smallest reason to reconsider it. Foley was not at the wedding. He had been in Bristol since February, in a small office of a firm of Mr. Pownall's acquaintance, on terms agreed in writing the day after Sir Charles had returned the letter to his desk. Pettiford was at the wedding. He stood at the back of the church in his Sunday coat, and he gave the bride, after the service, a small bunch of primroses he had picked at the parsonage gate at 6 in the morning, and he said, in his pulpit voice and with no perceptible irony, "Your Grace, the parish wishes you joy." Clara took the primroses. She said, "Mr. Pettiford, the parish has been kinder to me this winter than the parish was obliged to be." She and the Duke went down, after the wedding breakfast at Helmsby, by the Bridgewater Road to Carmichael Cottage in Somerset, for the first fortnight of their married life, as she had asked at the Lilac Walk in November that they should. It was on the second morning at the cottage, in the warm April sun in the small garden, that she went out before the breakfast hour to the lilac walk under the south wall. The lilacs were in flower. The first sprigs was opened, the colour Theo had told her in November they would be, the colour of the inside of a bruised plum at the throat of the bloom, paler at the tips. The bees were not yet up. The garden was very still. He came down the path behind her. He had been at the breakfast-room window. He had seen her cross the lawn in her morning gown, with no bonnet on her head. He stood at her shoulder at the lilac bush. He did not speak. She drew off her right glove. She put her gloved left hand on the small branch at the height of her shoulder, and she broke off, with her bare right hand, a single sprig of the lilac at the joint. The lilac branch came clean from the bush, its first opened flowers cool against her glove. She set it across his palm and closed his hand around it.